Warm welcome to everyone. Just before we get started, just want to make sure, can everyone hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
All right, everyone. Welcome to our collaborative webinar on community in sea turtle conservation, perspectives from the Global South. I am Dan Nashid, your host for the day. I am the project assistant here for ORP Maldives. I have to say, it's quite amazing to see so many people here today willing to acknowledge and learn about a key component of conservation, which is community participation and ownership. And I would also like to take this opportunity to wish everyone a very happy belated World Sea Turtle Day. This webinar not only marks a celebration of these wonderful creatures, but also the many ways in which we share our world with them. So to start off, I'd like to begin by introducing the Olive Ridley Project to our audience. So the Olive Ridley Project was founded in 2013. Our mission is to protect sea turtles and their habitats through rescue and rehabilitation, scientific research, and education and outreach. Our name is a testament to our humble beginnings of documenting olive ridley turtle entanglements here in the Maldives. However, since then, ORP's mission has expanded to take a global and holistic approach to sea turtle conservation. And we now have bases across Maldives, Seychelles, Kenya, Oman, and Pakistan. In fact, one of our speakers, Mr. Kahindi, is a member of our partner organization, Bahari High, here in Kenya. And as for our other speakers for the event today, we have quite a few. Although not our official partners, they are all individuals whose work we deeply respect and look to for inspiration. And on the speaker roster, you can see that apart from Kahindi, today we have Dr. Kartik Shanker, Dr. AA Yaptinchay, and Muralidharan as well. We are quite excited to hear from all the speakers, and as I'm sure all of you are as well. And if you are watching this on Zoom, Facebook, or YouTube, please enter your questions in the chat. We will be collating them and addressing them at the end of the session. And with that said, I'm just going to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Kartik, before giving him the floor for the keynote speech. So Dr. Kartik is an ecologist by training, but he also wears many hats. He is a professor at the Center for Ecological Sciences, Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore, where he conducts research on a range of taxa, including marine fauna. His work with marine turtles in the last 20 years has led to broader interests in coastal and marine conservation. His work is embedded in the belief that social, cultural, and political contexts largely determine conservation outcomes. Kartik is the founder of the trustee founder of the Dakshin Foundation, an organization committed to environmental sustainability and social justice in India. Kartik is also the co-founder and editor of Current Conservation, a magazine that bridges conservation and art. He has authored the book From Soup to Superstar, a historical account of sea turtle conservation in India, and also children's stories that include wonderful titles like Glory's Magical Mystery Turtle Story, The Adventures of Fallacious Frog, and Moonlight in the Sea, to name some. So, Kartik, we are quite honored to have you with us. So that said, I'll leave the stage to you.
Thank you, Dan, and Anadia and the Ridley Project for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here and to talk to turtle friends and others, other friends old and new. Okay, I'm just going to share my screen right here. Alrighty. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Yep.
All right, great. Okay, I understand that we're talking about community conservation and sea turtles and marine conservation today, but I thought I'd start with a little bit of a broader background and let our other speakers sort of lead on from that and talk more specifically about sea turtle, marine conservation, and communities. The reason that we face the challenges that we do today is owes to the history of conservation itself. And this is, people teach entire courses in this. I'm going to try and cover it in one slide. The history of what we think of as conservation today really begins in the early 20th century. Perhaps the ideas emerged in the late 19th century in Northern America through people like Henry Thoreau's writing, people like Roosevelt and Aldo Leopold and others, who had begun to recognize the impact that human activities have on nature. And they conceptualized nature as pristine and pristine wildernesses as desirable, and conservation being about the preservation of those pristine wildernesses. Right, so this leads to the establishment of the American National Park Service and several national parks, the history of which have been well documented. Ironically, some of the things that they saw as pristine actually looked the way they did because Native Americans had actually had managed those landscapes to look in a particular fashion. So what they actually thought was pristine wasn't, but that's another irony and a different story. Conservation then sort of becomes globalized through these global conservation organizations, many of which we know very well. By the 1940s and 50s, it's starting to these large NGOs are beginning to establish themselves, and the writings of people like Rachel Carson in the U.S. And the person that we consider to be the father of sea turtle conservation, Archie Carr. These start to really influence both terrestrial and marine conservation. By the 1960s and 1970s, conservation biology becomes established as this core discipline that's absolutely central to the pursuit of the success of conservation. And by the 21st century, the critique from social sciences and from other quarters allows conservation to be represented more as a common cause. Whether we've succeeded in that or not is a separate issue, but this is sort of the broader trajectory. Now, in that history, and actually dating much, much further back, there's been a colonial quest across disciplines. And this is not just in conservation, but it sort of like applies very much. Conservation sort of lends itself very well to this broader framework. People from more powerful societies have conquered other parts of the world historically, of course, for human resources, for resources and human resources. But within the conservation, in the century of conservation, the colonization or imperialism really was along three axes. One is knowledge, the other is money, and the third is space. And each of these plays out in a slightly different way. Conservation NGOs, for example, spread the idea of protected areas, pristine protected areas, wildernesses as being most or the only way to effect conservation, and therefore create what Mark Darby in the early 2000s called conservation refugees, and argues that it's the third largest cause of creating refugees after war and dams or something like that. They also established conservation really as being about charismatic animals, which attract a lot of money. As sea turtle people, we are very guilty of that. They also sell the idea that conservation is most effective when done with partners such as corporate organizations, and so there's the conservation corporate nexus, and the last sort of axis in this, when conservation organizations started to realize that actually there was a lot of money in development, they started to portray conservation as being about development as well. Some of them with good intentions, and some just as an instrumental way of bringing more money into the sector. There's a lot written about this. This is not my these aren't sort of like my opinions alone. Folks have written extensively along each of these things that I'm talking about. One map that kind of shows this really nicely is the map of where global international organizations work. And it's really, I really like the niche partitioning. If you overlay these, you kind of like, you see this, it's almost like they conferred and decided, well, you can have that part, I'll have the other part. We'll overlap in a few places. But large conservation organizations weren't the only ones guilty of colonization. There's the knowledge brokers. As I said, by the mid-20th century, by 1960s and 70s, conservation biology had become this crisis discipline. By the 70s, the journals Biological Conservation and Conservation Biology had been started. David Ehrenfeld was one of the founders of conservation biology, he said, biology is at the heart of all phases of conservation. He and many other very, very famous ecologists all believed that ecology was central to conservation, and therefore ecologists or conservation biologists really needed to be the authority about what happened in this field. The phrase authoritarian biologist is taken from an essay, a critique of this, written by Ramachandra Guha in 1998. It was actually more than 25 years ago, actually, where the full essay is called The Authoritarian Biologist, the Arrogance of Anti-Humanism. And other than Aaron, by the 80s, people have started writing textbooks. Michael Soule's textbook, Conservation Biology, comes out. And as you can see, inherent in each of these names is the idea that biology and biologists are at the center of this universe. What this allows also then is for people to pursue parachute science in the name of conservation. It's not that parachute science didn't happen already, but by the 1990s, at the CBD in Rio, there were extensive debates and protocols regarding IPR, exchange of IPR, people, like taking knowledge from other countries, but mostly in the context of biological products. But knowledge per se was still, okay, and especially if it was in a good cause. And so conservation being this, very righteous, noble cause allowed people to go around the world and say, it's okay, we can come here and take knowledge because we're doing it for a good cause. It's for everybody's good. So as you've seen the critiques recently, but really for the last 30 years, conservation was a shield for people, and I'm not saying they're all bad people or anything like that, but it provided a bit of a curtain behind which people could operate, freely. The problem with this in a way, and I'm going to come back to this, is that a certain perspective of nature and biodiversity and conservation could be promoted because conservation was being led by biologists, mostly from Western countries. So ideas that humans are not part of nature, the establishment of where are the areas that conservation should take place. As you'll notice, most of them are in the global south. How much of nature needs to be set aside. All of this, this is not based on raw facts or data. This is based on a particular perspective and questions asked in a particular way and imposed by a certain set of people. Even things like the assessment of endangerment by IUCN, the way that red lists are created, the way the red lists are maintained over time, all of it is from a particular perspective of what conservation is. So I mentioned a couple already, but I really wanted to emphasize what I call five myths about conservation. And I think these are really important to recognize because they affect the way we think about how people can be involved in conservation or what conservation is. One, of course, is this classic one that environment and development are inherently contradictory. And therefore, this, of course, is not true, but the posing of environment and development as contradictory often paves the way for a particular mode of development, which necessarily isn't about development for those who really need it. A second related one, which has been, for which the architect of this particular story is Paul Ehrlich. And Ehrlich, you should go back and read the things that Ehrlich wrote in the 60s about what would happen to the world if it expanded to the extent that it does today. Everything he said about society and economics was wrong. Some of the things he said about the environment are partly correct, but people think about, if you ask the average layperson what's the problem in the developing world, they'll say overpopulation, but it really isn't. The simple fact that much of the environmental damage and an enormous amount of the resources are used by a relatively small proportion of people means that the larger, the per capita use of environmental resources or carbon by 90% of the world is not what's causing environmental crises today. The third that I mentioned in the passing, I particularly like this one because it allows me to make compare E.O. Wilson and Thanos. E.O. Wilson wants half the Earth. Thanos wanted, no more. Thanos wanted half the universe. In other words, each of them wanted half of the humans or the, from one half gone. Now, I'd rather like to say that I prefer Thanos' method because he used a randomization algorithm and poof, half the universe disappeared. Wilson's half, however, is the poorer, more marginalized, already downtrodden half of the world. You want to set aside half of the world for nature. It's going to be in parts of Africa. It's going to be in South America. It's going to be in parts of Asia that are already much poorer than the rest of the world. So if you're going to get rid of the half of the world, I'd like to do it Thanos' way. As I mentioned before, all of this sort of derives from this misguided sense of pristine wildernesses. People have become so sort of the fervent ardor with which they pursue it leads me and my colleague to believe that it's a religion, which we deemed the name Christianity. Sorry. Another classic one that is particularly pervasive in the sea turtle community is that the consumptive use is bad. This ignores 100,000 years of human history, including the last 5,000 years, including the last 1,000 years of documented history, the last 100 years, and about 90% of our planet, of the people on our planet. I was intrigued that after many, many years of obsessing about protecting every turtle and every egg, finally at the symposium in Japan in a session about that was titled Beyond Protection, we talked about when it might be possible for us, for the communities that have traditionally used turtles to start using them again. If our decision to prohibit use or discourage use was based on the science that turtles were decreasing, now that we know they are increasing, we should change our policy. That is the logical, rational, and right thing to do. But of course, this doesn't apply only to turtles. This is a pervasive problem across conservation, and it basically denies the rights and culture of people around the world. Of course, this is what I consider to be a distraction. I think that we often have red herrings in conservation, such as vegetarianism, which really has very little to do with either conservation or long-term sustainability. I think certain forms of meat production are horrible and wasteful and produce enormous amounts of greenhouse gases and use huge amounts of land and water, but so do certain forms of agriculture. Which all of this leads me to believe that Calvin was right, that the surest sign that intelligent life exists elsewhere in the universe is that none of it has tried to contact us. Now, given all of this background in adduction, we've been formulating a theory of change, and I'll try and go over that in the next couple of minutes that I have left. We're working with people, most often communities that are most directly in contact with resources and species that are endangered. And our goal is both healthy communities and healthy ecosystems. I think we can reasonably agree that these are reasonable goals. Now, one of the things that we posit, which is a little different from perhaps many other conservation organizations, is that in working with the communities that are part of the ecosystem that we're trying to preserve, we can actually pursue well-being for the community's own sake. Not every action needs to have downstream benefits to save the species or ecosystem. We call this an ethical pathway. Healthy communities are generally more empowered and therefore have more time, inclination, and resources for conservation. This is an organic pathway to inclusive models which can lead to healthy ecosystems. Working with communities builds stronger relationships, enabling dialogue about conservation. This is a pragmatic approach. And all of these three pathways together can lead to healthy ecosystems. Healthy ecosystems lead back to healthy communities through supporting livelihoods, having less pollution, less disease spread, and so on, which closes the loop, the feedback pathways. And we study a whole set of socio-ecological systems that connect connect communities and ecosystems in order for us to bring about this change. One of the larger initiatives that we've started is called Sea Change, and it aims to leverage environmental livelihood benefits for coastal communities and spaces, working with the system to create community change makers who can accelerate social and environmental goals in their own communities. Some of the areas that we're sort of trying to bring together across sectors include health and nutrition, livelihoods, education, governance and leadership, and of course, environment. I want to finish with, I think what's at the heart of our relationship with nature and with people. When I say I love turtles, pretty much everybody, they're like, this guy either loves going to turtle beaches, he loves taking pictures of turtles, he loves studying turtles, he loves counting them, he loves doing research on them. Occasionally he might poke them and prod them, but on the whole, I love turtles as a statement from someone like myself is pretty easily interpreted. I love fish, a little less so, right? I could mean this. I love going out, I love diving and snorkeling, and I love seeing all of these beautiful fish reef fish in the water. Could mean that I love fishing, or I love eating the fish that caught. So I love fish could mean, they taste good, they have amazing diversity, they're beautiful, we need them to support coral reefs, they sustain coastal populations, they're medically important compounds. I love them for that reason. They make fridge magnets. Who cares? I think we're actually willing when we meet another human from any walk of life, actually to accept any of these explanations. Fish, most of us are willing to accept these explanations. Less so for turtles. And my submission is that our view of nature, as Sherlock Holmes says in a study in Scarlet, that our ideas must be as broad as nature if they are to interpret nature. And I would go one step further and say our ideas must be as broad as nature if we are to conserve nature. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kartik. That was an incredibly interesting and quite riveting address. I think very good start to the beginning of the webinar. It's a lot of interesting points, especially with the fact that everything is interconnected. Why are humans not really considered to be a part of nature? Very interesting points there. And that said, once again, just want to remind you all, if you do have any questions or anything that was being that is being talked about, please do enter your questions into the chat, either on Zoom, Facebook, or YouTube. We will be collating everything and addressing all the questions at the end. Now we're going to be moving on to our next speaker, who is Kahindi Changwa Galo from Kenya. Now, Kahindi comes with us. Wait just 1 second. Kahindi comes by with a lot of experience working in sea turtle conservation, nearly 2 decades of it. His journey started out with patrolling the beaches of Watamu. Oh, just 1 second, sorry. Can everyone see that? Yep, there we go. Yes, as I was saying. For those of us who may not know, Watamu is a coastal town in Kenya, north of Mombasa, and is known for its marine national park and reserve. So Kahindi's talk today will in fact address an initiative that aims to empower fishermen to mitigate sea turtle bycatch in Watamu, Kenya. So his career has touched on nearly all aspects of sea turtle conservation, from turtle rehabilitation to bycatch mitigation. His passion is around community development, sharing knowledge and skills with others in order to help empower them to protect the environment and the species they depend on. He is also the chairman and the community outreach and awareness program coordinator of Bahari High, a marine conservation organization based in Kenya. And so with that, I'll leave it to Kahindi to speak.
Thank you very much, Dan. Yeah, like it was nicely introduced by Dan. My presentation will focus on the turtle bycatch mitigation project that we're running in Media Creek and Media community in general. Therefore, how to introduce the project, turtle bycatch has been for over 20 years, we've been experiencing turtle bycatch in Media Creek, and this is largely because of the fishing gears which are highly used in the fishing grounds. The fishing grounds are the foraging grounds for turtles, and therefore the number of turtle bycatch has been increasing every time over many years. Coming to 2000, we chose to conduct a very small experiment, because we know that most of the turtles, like 90% of the turtles which are caught in Media Creek are caught in fishing nets. But then we wanted to find out exactly what are fishing nets, why. So we conducted a very small experiment with the Media fishermen. We do have two major types of fishing nets used in Media Creek. The most common one is the one which is built from fishing line. These are called the monofilaments in Kenya. Therefore, we went out with the fishermen with the two types of fishing nets: the monofilament fishing nets, which are built from fishing line, and the ones which are built from cotton. Therefore, the experiment we conducted, basically, in respect to the experience and the skills over many years the native fishermen have had, they always believe that if a turtle surfaces to take air, that turtle does not go far. It will remain or hang around there because it's either eating or just relaxing. And therefore, at some point, if they wanted to catch the turtle surfaces, they will just circle the area, the turtle surface to take air, and then they will just disturb the water. So they make sure that they circle the net, both ends will meet, and then the fishermen will jump in the middle of the fishing net, they disturb the water. If they see the turtle pushing the net at a certain corner, then they rush and get it. So because of that strategy, the number of turtles which were poached, it went really, really high. Every time we went out in different fish landing sites, we'll eventually see the turtle remains. We have a program that we've been always collecting the turtle remains, so it was easy to monitor which new turtles are being poached, and therefore at least be able to monitor the number of turtles which are poached within a specific period of time. Therefore, to proceed with the experiment, we went out with the fishermen in different canoes with those two different fishing nets. We kept on pedaling. The first turtle that surfaced, we used the fishing net that was built from fishing line. We circled it. The first turtle was caught. We released it. Then we pedaled again. The second turtle, we did the same procedures. The turtle was caught. So we casted the fishing nets using monofilament. All three turtles that we tested with that fishing net, they were all caught. We stopped using that fishing net, so we swapped it with a cotton fishing net. Two turtles managed to escape. One turtle was caught. So we did not disclose why we were conducting that experiment. Together with the authorities, the ones that we do work closely around here, the Kenya Service and the Fisheries Department. So we usually have sensitization meetings, landing site to landing site, with the fishermen. After the experiment, we shared our results with the Kenya Service and the fisheries. Monofilament fishing nets are illegal. So fishermen, whether artisanal fishers, commercial, this kind of fishing nets are not allowed. But then in respect to the fishing pressure, the population of fishermen has gone high. Destructive fishing practices are highly in use. The fish stock has heavily depleted, but then everyone still wants to get a daily bread from fishing, and therefore any fishing gear that will catch most of the fish, it will always be used. That's why monofilaments are used, because they're invisible anytime they're used in the water. That's why turtles do not have a chance to escape when these monofilaments are used. The answers the fishermen gave while they were fishing, because we were questioning them, why were these turtles caught in this kind of fishing gear, and the other one, we're always complaining that cotton fishing nets are not the best ones to use, because always minimizes the fish catch, plus turtles or marine creatures they're targeting in general. So for turtles, they believe if they happen to see the net underwater, they usually swim, sit on the floor ground, and therefore the net will just crawl over on the carapace. Soon the turtle realizes that there is no obstacle ahead of it, it will swim away, which means that the turtle is now free. With the monofilament, if they disturb the water, they just panic and finally they find themselves caught because the fishing nets are invisible in the water. Part of our sensitization in landing site to landing site, the Kenya Water Service plus the fisheries, they chose to take the laws seriously. So they started removing all the illegal fishing gears, and they were removing by either confiscating, or the fishermen which were found using those fishing gears will as well be arrested and end up doing some minor jobs at the park. So basically, because of the awareness and the law implementation by the authorities, we agreed with the fishermen. They started approaching us, seeking for help from Bahari High, and that's where we agreed with them that Bahari High was willing to exchange the illegal fishing gears they were using, and some of the fishing gears were like mosquito nets. Some of them, they were not even gears, but then the use of poison, using the undersized fishing nets, circling an area where they would eventually use poison to now kill the fish, but at the same time not giving them a chance to escape. So in a nutshell, we finally came to agreement that those who are willing to exchange the illegal fishing gears with the legal fishing gears, then we started supporting them. Some of the fishermen, this is part of the sensitization, truly believe, and they're still always claiming that Meter Creek is strangled by the native fishermen themselves, because they believe that bigger fish can never make a decision of swimming into Meter Creek because there is no food for them. They believe that there's no food because all the small fish which can be eaten by the bigger fish have no reason of going in, because they're always fished by the undersized fishing nets, including the mosquito nets and the use of poison. It has been a little bit difficult over many years for a foreigner or somebody working with an organization going to the community to always educate them on what's right and are wrong. However, the ones who received this information took it serious. We used them as teachers of other fishermen operating using illegal fishing gears. That's when we started seeing change. So the project of gear exchange, we started in the year 2000, and the effect of the project, we did find a reduction of that of bycatch by 76%, which is 1,299 in the year 2000. It dropped in 2021 to 723, and it keeps on going down. We strongly believe that sustainable fishing practices, any fishing grounds, it can reduce turtle bycatch at a really high scale. We do have fishermen from different fish learning sites, but there are those who really took the sensitization information we were sharing with them really serious, and therefore the fishermen who are using poison channels, undersized fishing nets, mosquito nets, and everything, their fishing grounds had turned to like desert. It was completely barren. To now replenish their fishing grounds, the channels in their areas, they closed them as nursery and as hatchery and nursery grounds for small fish, which would as well encourage big fish to swim in their areas and then while they're fishing, it could improve their fish catch. We've supported this group with the legal fishing gears. The fish catch is really amazing now. They keep on sending us pictures of their catch. There is a very good improvement. The fish which are now swimming in their area, the fish which are in the channel, keeps on growing. So the population of fish is growing. More species as well, which were not visible, which are not present years back, we are now seeing them. So they strongly believe that the project of the initiative of closing the channels is really working as a fish replenishing project. With the fish gear exchange project, the blue circles, these are the areas that we already did the gear exchange. The yellow ones is in progress. The red ones, these are the ones that which are yet to follow. We're a little bit careful on how this project works. Everyone will be interested in getting legal fishing gear, knowing that we won't be under any pressure with the authorities. However, we try to make sure that we are not giving more fishing gears than what the creek can sustain. Because by just giving more fishing gears, it can as well deplete the fish stock, even though they are the right fishing gears. So we are a little bit careful. How the project works, we've agreed with the fishermen. Every cluster of fishermen, which is a beneficiary of this project, we make sure that there is money set aside to sustain the project, of which even when the fishing gear gets old, it can either be fixed or number two, be replaced with a new fishing gear. So they are not always just relying on us on the provision of these gears. At the same time, we strongly believe that not all illegal fishing gears have been eliminated. Not all fishermen have stopped using these illegal fishing gears. So sensitization meetings are still on, trying to convince more fishermen to adopt sustainable fishing gears. The tools that we use that help us pass a message to the fishermen. This project is going together, is going hand in hand with the project with the fishermen collect the fish catch data on daily basis. In every 3 months, we usually come up with a report of their catch on daily basis, the size and everything. This has opened serious dialogues with the fishermen so they fully understand where the problem is, and they now fully participating with the solutions in making their fishing grounds reliable again. The same fishing grounds that we are now facing these challenges. Many years back when I was in nursery, when I was in primary school, these were places that you couldn't go anywhere near because of the big fish while they are eating the small ones in the channels. The way aggressively would attack. For children who are still in primary school, it was really scary. The fish that they were fishing those days, they were catching few fish, but then because they were big, they would get more money. Nowadays, because the big fish have been, the stock of big fish have been depleted, they're getting so many fish, tiny little ones that they use caps to sell. And they're seeing the impact of their own fishing pressure that they've induced into the fishing grounds. But good news is they appear to be willing to fully participate and change. This is why in several areas of the creek, we're already seeing improvement of their catch. Thank you very much. That was the last slide of my presentation. Back to you, Dan.
Thank you very much, Kahindi. That was quite interesting. It was very nice to hear about all the work you're doing with the fishermen over. And it's quite nice to see as well all the results as well in terms of the reduced turtle bycatch as well, and quite heartwarming to hear that a lot of people are willing to listen and change their practices and try to be more sustainable as well. Now, with that in mind, we're going to move on to our next topic, which will be by Dr. AA from, so we're just going to give a little intro to our speaker. So Dr. AA is a doctor of veterinary medicine, who is also a marine wildlife specialist with extensive experience spanning nearly 30 years in the conservation and management of long-lived, threatened, endangered, and protected marine species. He is the founder and executive director of the environmental NGO Marine Wildlife Watch of the Philippines, which has been working on the conservation of marine biodiversity in the Philippines since 2009. So with that said, we'll pass it over to Dr. AA for his talk, community-led marine turtle conservation initiatives in the Philippines. Over to you.
Good evening here, so good evening everyone. Just give me a second. All right. Am I loud and clear? Okay, so my task today is talk about marine turtle conservation in the Philippines. And I would like to give you some introduction first of what's going on in the country. All right, just to give you an introduction of the Philippines. So we're an archipelago. We have a total of 7,641 islands. And we have a very long coastline. More than almost 37,000 kilometers of coastline. And I'm mentioning all of these because most of our coastal area and inner seas are habitat to marine turtles. So out of the 7 marine turtles globally, we have 5 present in the Philippines. And we have the olive ridley, the hawksbill, the green turtle, loggerhead, and leatherback turtle. So locally, we call marine turtles pawikan. So I hope you can remember that because I'll be mentioning the word pawikan a lot in my presentation. So for the Philippine islands, we are offering different habitats for marine turtles. So including nesting beaches, internesting habitat, feeding habitats, including coral reefs, seagrass bed, and bottom communities, developmental habitats for some species, mating habitats, and even probably the lost deer habitat. I hope everyone's familiar with the marine turtle life cycle. And as we all know, turtles are highly migratory. So we've documented within the Philippine waters, turtles moving from throughout the archipelago, which is around more than 1,500 kilometers. But marine turtles also cross international boundaries, and we share turtle resources with our neighboring countries in Southeast Asia, especially with Indonesia and Borneo, and even up to Australia and up north to Taiwan and Japan. In the Philippines, all 5 species that we have are fully protected since the 1970s. And currently we have Republic Act 9147, or what we call the Philippine Wildlife Act, which protects all marine turtles in the country under the mandate of our Department of Environment and Natural Resources, or the DENR. We have our own categories, and 2 of the species, the hawksbill and the leatherback turtle, are considered critically endangered in the Philippines, and the green olive ridley and loggerheads are endangered. I would also like to point out that the Philippines is a signatory or a party to a lot of international conventions, including the Convention on Biological Diversity, CITES, Convention on Migratory Species, or TMS, and we're even part of the IUCEA, or the Indian Ocean Southeast Asia Marine Turtle Memorandum of Understanding under the CMS. And other regional initiatives such as the Coral Triangle Initiative and the West and Central Pacific Fisheries Commission agreement. So most of our natural resources is managed under government programs, and as I said earlier, the DENR is in charge of our marine turtles, and they are engaged in several activities, including research, training, capacity building, information dissemination, awareness raising, law enforcement, establishment and management of marine protected areas, and programs on marine protected area networks, especially for migratory species. But not only our national government is involved in this, but also local government. So in our case, that would be municipal governments and provincial governments in the different parts of the Philippines. One of the most important sites for marine turtles would be in the Philippines, would be in the Turtle Islands, which is comprised of 9 islands, 7 which are in the Philippines, and the rest are in Malaysia. So it's one of the most important rookeries for green turtles in the world. So that's managed under our National Integrated Protected Area System, and it's called the Turtle Islands Wildlife Sanctuary in the Philippines. So most of the nestings, mostly of green turtles, are happening in those islands in the south of the Philippines. We all know about the different threats to marine turtles, as illustrated here, but I would like to point out that even with the protection, there's still poaching going on. So marine turtles are caught and the meat is utilized and eaten in coastal communities. And we also have turtle eggs being poached and eaten as well. since the 70s, decades ago, a lot of turtles have been harvested for their beautiful carapace and turned into curios. The scutes are being utilized for these curios. Sometimes they don't care about the whole turtle anymore. They just get the scutes. And most of these products go to, as you can see in the illustration here, to China, Vietnam, and mainland Asia. With, for example, south of Palawan being an import and transshipment point for these turtles, as evidenced by some foreign vessels poaching marine turtles in Philippine waters, in collaboration mostly with some of our local fisher folks. They collect the turtles, then foreign fishing boat will collect the harvest at one point and ship them to mainland Asia. The Turtle Islands since it's a major rookery for green turtles, has been a smuggling point for a lot of turtle eggs, especially transported from the Philippines into Malaysia. Other issues include bycatch. I'd like to point out ghost nets. There's a lot of synthetic nets being left in the ocean. Captivity and head starting, which are all illegal in the Philippines. There are guidelines in the Philippines where we recommend immediate release of hatchlings, especially those raised in hatcheries. We worry very much about coastal development, especially like building of seawalls, which are eating up the beaches. Coastal development, including other types of pollution, including artificial lights and noise. So being an archipelago of more than 7,000 islands, there are many challenges in the Philippines, especially like difficulty in accessing some of our islands and some of the more isolated nesting beaches. And if we do have those reports, typically we wouldn't have technical personnel on the ground to act on a marine turtle incident, be it documentation or reporting or enforcement of protection of laws, especially if there's some illegal activity going on. And one of the research activities of our government is tagging of marine turtles that are nesting or those that are caught as bycatch. And we cannot supply most or all of the islands in the Philippines usually. So there's a lack of tags, materials, and equipment. So we were able to map out important nesting sites. So I would like to say, like, potentially all the beaches or the beautiful beaches in the Philippines are all potential nesting beaches for at least 4 marine turtles in the Philippines. So except for the loggerheads, all the other 4 species have been documented to nest in the Philippines. The most would be green turtles, olive ridleys, and the hawksbill turtle. So given those challenges and difficulties, we've seen a lot of local initiatives happening with different groups, including individuals, local NGOs, the academy, and various businesses being involved in marine turtle conservation in different parts of the Philippines. And it is asked by our law that these activities be regulated. So for any group to engage in marine turtle conservation, they would need to go into a memorandum of understanding with our Department of Environment and Natural Resources. And at the moment, they should have like more than 100 MOUs but not all of these are active, and I've written out here in the map and kind of distributed where they are quite active in the Philippines. And I'll give you some of the examples of these initiatives. So the typical management approaches, so there's very big interest in the nesting habitats where communities are usually encountering the marine turtle. So most of the conservation efforts are focused on the nesting beaches. We've monitored some areas, and there apparently is a lot of bycatch reports also, and sometimes even more reports of bycatch than of nesting turtles. And in most cases, some of the bycatch will be mostly of juveniles, making us think that a lot of the areas are being utilized as developmental habitat as well. The tendency of the different areas would be to go immediately to creating a hatchery where eggs are usually collected throughout the beach and brought to a central station for easier management. And since all of our beaches are quite nice, most of the beaches where the nesting turtles go to are also tourist sites, as you will see in some of the examples. So this is one of the sites, an important site in the Philippines where a lot of a good example of a community-based marine turtle nesting beach management program. It's one of the earliest also. It's in Morong, Bataan, if you can see in this map where the star is. And it's led by a fisherman organization called Bantay Pawikan, or Pawikan Waters. So they're mostly involved in hatchery, beach patrol, rescue, rehabilitation. They're big on tourism and awareness raising. They're very successful in this, running for a few decades now. That the local government in the provincial level kind of took over their operation and created what they call a One Bataan. Bataan is the province, Pawikan Conservation Alliance Network, to involve more stakeholders. So what I'm seeing in some of these sites is that the locals actually see that there's a need to act on the presence of marine turtles, and they've seen the problems. For example, in Morong, Bataan, most of the fisher folks involved were previous poachers of marine turtle eggs. And they're now one of the leading groups in marine turtle conservation in the country. So going up in the western coast of the island of Luzon, we have another group, which is an NGO, and they're called PURMA, or Coastal Underwater Resource Management Actions. They've been doing a very good job in implementing management intervention in the nesting beach in that part of the country. So again, they're involved in hatchery, patrolling, rescue and rehabilitation, and awareness raising. Most of these groups are also involved in, like, for example, coastal cleanups and other coastal rehabilitation projects. So this is now NGO run for that locality of these. There are special cases also that private businesses, commercial businesses are involved. For example, in Bangi, in Ilocos Norte, way up in the north of the Philippines, where there's a company involved in renewable energy, and they have a wind farm there by the beach, and the beach is actually a nesting beach for Hollywood blue turtle. So Ayala Corporation, through their renewable energy program, has partnered with local governments and the DNR. And they're involved in a lot of things in including coastal resource management and other climate change mitigation interventions, so including alternative energies and reforestation. So they're involved in improving the management of the nesting beach in the area as well. So moving totally south in the Philippines, in the island of Mindanao, we have Mati Davao Oriental. They have 3 species there nesting: the olive ridley, the green, and the hawksbill. And a lot of the work there has been initiated by a local surfing group called Anihan sa Bahitan. They're very active, for example, in social media. So is the rest of the Philippines. And they're involved in hatchery, rescue, and rehabilitation, patrolling the nesting beach, and awareness raising. So we're seeing very similar activities in a lot of these sites. And kudos to what I call local champions, because as I say, our government cannot take care of everything that's going on in all of our islands. So we need like local champions to be and passionate people to be pushing for a conservation agenda for marine people. But with all of these happening, we're having problems also in standardizing methods and management approaches. So some of the activities, for example, I mentioned earlier that there could be like more than 100 partners globally, but not all of them are doing similar things. And some practices might even be harmful to marine turtles. So we're very involved in developing knowledge products. For example, manuals. Our government has come up with a technical bulletin on, which is illustrated here, which shows guidelines on the protection of marine turtles in nesting habitats, and we're even involved in tourism regulation involving marine turtles. So, for example, in proper handling and response, we've come up with manuals not only for marine turtles, but for marine mammals and also for birds and rays. All of these are free to download online for anyone who's interested. I go back to tourism later on, but our government has developed a Marine Turtle Conservation Action Plan, which should be start be implemented this year for the next 10 years. And if you look at the vision involving the conservation of marine turtles, we would like communities to be an important part in their participation in contributing to the conservation for everyone to benefit. So our government is very aware in working with stakeholders. In the Philippines, we're very active in social media, and because citizen science is a good way to get more information about marine turtles in the Philippines, we're utilizing mostly Facebook to get a report. So most of the Filipinos would have their phone with a camera, and we're kind of documenting everything. And as long as we get the species, exact location, date, etc., we can put it in a database, and that's what we've been doing, mapping out where these reports are. There's still a lot of information gaps in the Philippines, and we're trying to utilize citizen science using social media for this. Although there are other specific citizen science activities, for example, an organization called Lamade working in the Philippines, they've introduced the photo identification of turtles, particularly in feeding areas where people usually snorkel. And scuba diving is a big thing in the Philippines. So when divers or skin divers or scuba divers are encountering turtles, they can always submit a photo as specified on how to take it in this. And going back to tourism, we're seeing more and more sites in the Philippines, special habitats of marine turtle, to be infiltrated by tourists, and we've seen a lot of wrong practices we've seen here. So we've been promoting responsible interaction, and our government actually came up with what we call a joint memorandum circular regulating interaction with not only marine turtles but other protected marine wildlife in the Philippines. So there is zoning, for example, for nesting turtles, how to do it, how many snorkelers or scuba divers can be in the water, or how many boats can interact with the turtle. For example, there's so we have those. The Philippines is big on festivals and fiestas. So all of the sites I mentioned earlier, where there are local champions working, they usually have like what we call a weekend festival. So typically it's a yearly event where we celebrate coming of the turtles, but most of it will be seasonal. So it's a lot of partying, dancing, colors, costume. So it's increasing awareness and promoting marine turtle conservation to a wider audience here in the Philippines. So I would say a lot of communities are involved, and with different groups being involved in different parts of the Philippines, we're seeing more and more awareness on marine turtle conservation in the Philippines, and hopefully get a lot of our population be concerned and be involved. So thank you. That's my thought.
Thank you very much, Dr. AA. That was quite an interesting insight and overview into the conservation scene in the Philippines. I'm pretty sure we all learned a lot. It's quite heartwarming to hear about all the community-led initiatives that are out there trying to do some good in the community as well. And with that, we will move on to our last speaker for today. So we have Muralidharan from India. Now, Muralidharan will be giving us a talk. And his work largely focuses on studying marine flagship species, including sea turtles, sea snakes, and sharks across the Indian coast to address wide issues of coastal development and conservation. Having engaged with traditional fishing communities, Murali has been working towards participatory models of conservation and liaising with policymakers on developing effective conservation management plans. Murali is currently serving as a marine conservation and policy consultant with WWF India. So we're pretty sure that with his experience with fishing communities, we will get quite a fresh perspective. So with that said, I'll pass it over to Murali.
Thanks, Dan, and thanks to the Olive Ridley Project and everybody else for hosting me for this event. And share the screen. Yeah, can everybody see the screen in front of you? All right, perfect. And once again, thank you for inviting me over, and it's great to have this talk, also following the wonderful presentations ahead of me, including Kartik, with whom I worked for several years. And, you know, for a long time, we have been accused of having a hive mind and thinking about similar topics to discuss whenever, something is brought about. So I would say some of this has already been covered by Kartik, but I think it'll be a good refresher to do before we open it up for the question and answer session. Now, I think the background behind my talk when I was asked to talk about turtles and the work that I've done is it always went back to the coastal communities. And the largest issue at hand is that the communities have shared these spaces with several marine species. And these interactions have ranged from various different things. It could be consumptive for food or even religious aspects in different parts of the world. And what is more popularly seen and is used to bring in interest amongst people is the aesthetic value. Like turtles look nice, they look cute, or several other, like turtles and other species. So considering this value for conservation that's associated with these large flagship species, how has this changed over time, and how do we work towards changing these threats that are faced by marine biodiversity? And Kartik already touched about this, and yeah, I just wanted to bring this back. The idea of conservation largely began in the Americas with a few of these individuals that were mentioned, and the concept of conservation and preserving nature always came from this thought that, it has to be a state of harmony. Though there was a lot of advocacy that was also going around for using that area for hunting and extraction, it over time transformed primarily into having separate spaces for wildlife and people associated with those areas. And immediately when people are brought to this topic on what are the primary threats to wildlife, some of the key points that are always mentioned are habitat loss. Something's happening locally to the habitats of certain species or in that area, or something as global as climate change is going to affect, the way species are going to be able to adapt. And the third one is conflict with, again, usually communities and how they specifically interact with those species at hand. Which again goes behind, I think this is something which, in a nutshell, most conservation organizations would say their practices range in these 4 criteria. It could be habitat management. It could be working with policy and advocacy. It could be working with rehabilitation and rescue, or and the favorite, outreach and education, which is primarily directed towards, again, local communities as well. So I'm using this as, a placeholder. This is commonly seen in most conservation practices that people talk about in the work that they do. Now, coming back to the sea, there is a huge aesthetic value. It's always seen as this great, wide open, clear blue seas, quite pristine, filled with these amazing creatures all around that, add to the beauty and value of these areas. And species like the olive ridley that, come together to nest in probably one of the biggest wildlife spectacles that people could imagine, the mass nesting that happens in a few places across the world, including India. These are the images that kind of drive people towards, protecting something so beautiful. And this could be driven by specific types of outreach, again, that is documentaries and the kind of narratives that go behind it. And needless to say, I have done the same as well. So it isn't, it is something that everybody has used over time. But these wide open blue waters are not just being used by those wonderful animals that you saw earlier. It also includes fishing communities who access these areas for fisheries resources, for food. It could be something nice, and again, a pretty photograph of this traditional fishing craft in the middle of the ocean. Or when you come closer to the harbor, you see, all these boats aggregating together, which seems a little bit more complicated on how we're going to manage such a system. But the communities as well have their own sense of awe and wonder when they go out to sea. And this can come both from observing the animals that we did, that brings in a lot of interest, but also in terms of the fish and how they can gather them. And every so often, it also does lead to conflict in certain ways that could affect sea turtle species or any other charismatic animal. And in most cases, it's been seen from my experiences that they're largely indifferent. And when it's accidental, it isn't through any reason for directly causing harm. Again, I'm going back to one of the themes that Kartik did touch about, like when this broad concept of wildlife conservation is discussed, we do think about protecting species under the threat of extinction. And this is the most popularly known listing of categories of species that is here, IUCN's red list, ranging from, the kind of threats that is supposed to have been bringing together the idea of what kind of threats a particular animal faces, and categorizing them by a value which kind of decides how much importance and how much more action needs to be taken towards protecting them. But coming back to like specific work, like do the work that is happening on ground through research and monitoring, does it directly get translated into changing any of these categories, and who decides some of this? And this is sometimes heavily debated within the conservation community itself. And thanks again, Kartik, for bringing up something like what was discussed at the Sea Turtle Symposium in Japan, where there still is a heavy debate on, when have we reached a state in time where, there are enough turtles. And this is again work that has been happening over the last decade or so by Dakshin Foundation, recently published, that shows the amount of nesting turtles that do come to one nesting beach, one major mass nesting beach, which can range anywhere from a few 100,000 to almost 400,000 in a certain year. And looking back in time, this kind of seems to match what historical numbers used to be 30 years ago, when conflict increased with extensive fishing that was happening in the nearshore waters. But this doesn't seem to have affected them at the scale as well. On the other hand, again, this is very recently published work from another interesting species, which is the green sea turtle. Has been seeing increasing numbers in one part of the island systems in India, in Lakshadweep, where the numbers of turtles that are seen in the different island lagoons have increased over time. And this in turn has affected the amount of seagrass that used to be there in the lagoons. And the increased protection that is provided to these green sea turtles have ensured that none of the turtles are being taken for any traditional use. And additionally, there is conservation inputs that's been given in to even the nests that are laid across its distribution. So most nests are moved to hatcheries, and this in turn increases their survival possibility. And this could be a case where the increase in turtle numbers and animals being animals having to feed on something have modified entire ecosystems that could potentially have led to a collapse of several other species sharing that same habitat, and also leading to a certain amount of discomfort by the local communities, because the loss of seagrass beds in this region meant it was affecting the number of seagrass associated fish species, which people used to harvest for their personal consumption. So that over time has led to a sense of animosity against the green sea turtles over here. Now, these are charismatic species. People talk about them a lot, and and still there is a push for their conservation. And in many cases, they're still doing better. But over time, we also did observe that this intensive fishing that was happening was affecting other species, which were largely being ignored. And once we started looking at another similar marine reptile, like the sea turtle, sea snakes, once quite common and abundant across the coast, were also being affected by bycatch in fisheries. And just a preliminary, like some of the preliminary work that we did at one particular landing site on the Indian coast, we saw that more than 1,100 sea snakes were being caught in fishing as fisheries bycatch. And this, over time, when we looked at the type of assemblages, there were two common species that were seen. That is the yellow-bellied sea snake and the hook-nosed sea snake. The hook-nosed sea snake, as you can see in this graph, used to be the more common variety of sea snake seen in these waters. But we could see that over time, by the time when we had conducted our study, the hook-nosed sea snake became the more common one, and the yellow-bellied sea snake, not the yellow-bellied, the spine-bellied sea snake started becoming rarer and rarer. And this potentially could be the case of one species being more susceptible to mortality in fisheries-associated practices, has caused actually a shift in the kind of species that you get in sea snakes as well. And unlike sea turtles that were getting a lot of attention every time an injured animal was found or dead turtles washed ashore, this was something that was completely ignored because they aren't as cool, they aren't as interesting to bring people's attention to, but the picture itself showed a larger problem at stake, that people were going out and catching a large number of animals that weren't even being consumed in their regular fishing practices, which led us to further look at what was happening in the oceans around, and who the different players were and what the different drivers for this kind of difference in practice was happening. There were your larger, more industrial type of fisheries like trawlers and larger purse seiners, and also the small scale fisheries that shared the same space as other commercially important species and your flagship species like your sea turtles and the often ignored sea snakes. And the decline in target catch for one type of fishing industry started driving a decline across the entire system. And trying to understand this complicated space with different players, all trying to, make a livelihood out of the oceans, required a lot more complicated thought. And simple solutions, such as just protecting the sea turtle, wasn't going to fix the rest of this, the issues that was happening around in the oceans. So, which is why I think a lot more people have changed the way that they have worked with things. This includes, the larger NGOs and governments, which who started looking at these systems as a whole, that included the people, the fish that is being consumed, and also the animals that share the same spaces. And this brought us to something smaller, that is like, how do we develop, sustainable conservation action on the ground? it would be through promoting sustainability in traditional practices and providing better benefit for communities that have traditionally used these landscapes to harvest and support their livelihoods. And this is one thing that has been definitely changing over time. And with more and more people talking about parachute science, and I think a lot of organizations globally have started getting the locals involved in the activities beyond just the monitoring and the data collection, but also towards the decision making of conservation action that's been driving driving organizations in the global south. While at the same time, again, as oceans do exist, there is an economy that is driving several different practices. So future planning also needs to have this in mind. So I think the challenge ahead, and as I had discussed earlier, when I was called to have this talk, is about thinking about the future and evolving our conservation ideas and items. Things like I myself confess, I started off with a completely authoritarian biologist kind of an approach when I started out in this sector, but meeting different people and reading wider subjects has changed the way I look at things. And this is possible only through more and more collaborations and open communications. You can't have single entities driving, the conservation thought across the globe. Opportunities such as this, bringing together people working in different parts of the world and how they carry out their activities and bringing in the concepts of what local ideas revolve around is the way that we can move ahead. And I think thanks to Zoom, and I think, again, the one good thing that's come out of the pandemic is it is making this a lot more accessible to most people as well, to talk about different ideas around how we manage our conservation plan. And I'd like to keep it short. I think this is an opportunity in a webinar to also discuss some of these ideas with the audience around, instead of, I didn't want to focus specifically on, the work that I do and spend a lot of time around it, but open it up to how, different people are working in different spaces and how we can meet some of those challenges. I'd like to end my talk today. I'm ending it quite fast with one of the stories that kind of inspired me and kind of changed the way I look at things. Again, touching back to one of the things that Kartik talked about, the arrogance of knowledge that used to be brought into the field, was while working on, when I first started working on sea turtles on the east coast of India in Orissa, where we were putting satellite transmitters to see where the turtles go, and a lot of jargon around finding their migratory routes and stuff. So we did tag the first male olive in India during this exercise. So we caught a male and a female out at sea, and we put the transmitter onto their shell, and after it was ready to be released, we released them back together. Now, the female turtle quickly walked away. She crawled into the ocean and was gone. And the male turtle was struggling really to get it back to the sea. And there were a bunch of us, several experienced scientists who had read a lot about turtles. We ensured that the best practices were in place. And we kept wondering, what's happening? Why isn't this male going into the water? And Damru, I think Kartik would also have a lot to talk about him. One of the field staff, traditional fishermen from the community, who had been working on the conservation projects for several years. was the first person who came out with this idea, which we hadn't thought about, but now strikes me as something so simple. He was like, the male turtle doesn't know how to walk on the beach because he's never come back to land after he left the beach as a hatchling. He crawled away from his nest and has lived his entire life out at sea. And so bringing him on land is, he just doesn't know how to walk. And, there was such a simple and clear explanation, which nobody had initially thought about. And that kind of knowledge is what I'd rather use for delivering conservation action, or, like management ideas that comes from the people who actually live their lives across the seas and use these systems and are so integrated with what happens around in nature. So with that, I should end my presentation and we can open it up for the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Murali, for that interesting talk. So now we're going to move on to the Q&A part of our webinar. I'm pretty sure we've had quite a few questions coming in as well. I'm pretty sure our panelists or speakers would love to get their hands on some of the questions. So we'll start off with the first one for Murali. So the question is coming in from, let me just check. Yeah, from Penelope Neve. So for Murali, the question is, she has read that turtles help to keep seagrass meadows healthy as grazing promotes seagrass growth. However, why is this not always the case?
So I think this is an interesting case that, is being observed in several places around the globe, that once, herbivores increase in populations above a certain scale, the effect on the landscape that they have is more detrimental to the landscape. And this is not just the case in India, in Lakshadweep. It is being observed in several other sites. This is again further becoming worse because we are removing large sharks who are their natural predators, which could have kept their populations in some sort of control. So I think over time, and this is an example that's been seen across different landscapes in large herbivores as well. So I think it's the scale that matters, and I think at some level that it requires a certain level of management. Like there's grazing and there's overgrazing that's happening at the moment.
That's very fair. There's a lot. Too much of a good thing can be pretty bad, I suppose, but with everything. Fair. I have one more question as well. So previously, Kahindi spoke of, once again for Murali. So Kahindi spoke of how protecting sea turtles from bycatch led to better fish catch by the fishermen. So in a way, protecting the sea turtles could say help to protect the fish stock. But you spoke of on how excessive focus on flagship species like sea turtles does not help to fix sea snake bycatch, for example. So would you say there's a middle ground between these two positions?
Yeah, I think in a sense, I think Kartik would also I'd love to hear his opinion over here. By focusing too much on the turtle, and the problem that we were focusing on was protecting the turtle. We didn't look at what was pushing fisheries into becoming more unsustainable. This could mean, bad markets for them, for the catch that is being derived, or, markets opening up for other alternates that, like bycatch being reduced into fish meal and fish oil, has allowed people to make money from every little aspect that they can get. So I think if you look at it as, from a justice perspective, people are struggling to get some livelihood out of it. if we need to address those drivers of extensive fishing before we move on to like looking specifically at flagship species. So, and yeah.
Fair enough. Interesting answers right there. I hope that was a good enough answer for our audience here. Now, I will just move on to a question for Dr. AA. All right, can you hear me? Can we all hear Dr. AA?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. So the first question I have for you is, so where in Mindanao are the greens nesting? Is that near Cagayan de Oro, and how many are there? I'm sorry if I kind of butchered the pronunciation there.
All right. For the part of the Mindanao area, most of the green turtles would be nesting in the Tawi-Tawi area, including the Turtle Islands. Yes. So that's the major site. And in terms of how many nesters, I wouldn't have the numbers, sorry.
Fair. No worries. And the second question we have is, in regards to the protection programs and everything that's happening, are there any monetary benefits for the community members that are actively engaged in these protection programs?
Well, I mentioned earlier that in most of the nesting beaches where there is some conservation management activities by the locals, these are tourist areas. And there's a lot of interest from their visitors to see what they're doing and activities related to marine turtle conservation. So that's somehow promoting the area in a very positive way. I know some of the local groups give direct incentives to the fishing community, for example, to report marine turtles, or even to surrender the eggs in one of their hatcheries. So some groups actually pay some of the locals to do it for them.
Fair. All right, I hope that clears things up. Next up, we have a couple questions for Kahindi. Are you still here with us? Hello there. So the first question I have for you is, did the fishermen feel irritated by the sea turtles before? And how do they feel about the turtles after having worked with you?
Well, initially, yes, they feel irritated because if the turtles are caught in the fishing nets, while they're struggling to free themselves, they cause damages in the fishing nets. So, but then they initially used to say that the turtles pay for themselves. They cover the damages themselves. If a turtle is caught, the fishermen butcher it and sell. They usually make more than enough money for just fixing the fishing gear. So the rest will always be shared amongst the fishermen. So yes, they were irritated. At the same time, they used to believe that. And then one other behavior that they had adopted, the turtles which were feared to be poisonous, example, hawksbills, they used to claim that these turtles, once they are caught, they should be killed. So they will never ever be caught again and damage fishing gears. So to discourage that behavior, so the sensitization approaches regarding turtle conservation was at least giving turtles a second chance to survive in the hands of fishermen.
Thank you. That was quite nice. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that would have been a lot of work convincing all of them as well, especially when you kind of have these old-timey beliefs like stuff can be poisonous and whatnot. Now, the second question that we have is, how were you able to convince the fishermen to turn their gears in, especially when, for example, like they're relying on these equipment, these tools? How were you able to talk to them about it?
So there were two approaches. So the first one was just the sensitization. Before we conducted the experiment, we didn't know that these gears, even though that they're illegal, initially we used to believe it's entirely upon the government to take control, implement the law, and correct it. But then after conducting the experiment, we realized that these fishing gears are illegal with reasons. And one was the excessive catch of marine creatures. Now, after that, after we communicated the results of the experiment with authorities, which is Kenya World Service plus the fisheries, then because turtles in Kenya are protected, conserved by law, it is illegal for anyone to be seen with a turtle, either dead or alive, or even just a part of the turtle body. Therefore, when you communicated the results of the Kenya Service plus the fisheries, they were shocked, and therefore they chose to take the law seriously. Therefore, they started increasing their patrols, confiscating the illegal fishing gears, and therefore, so the fishermen at some point, they were desperate. They have to fish to earn their living. This time around, they are losing their fishing gears. So they started approaching us, and we had dialogues with them on how we could fix that problem. But then we didn't just go out and started handing the fishing gears. We asked them to come together as groups, for them to agree in a meeting, to make that meeting, formally, to take the minutes and share the minutes with us, for us to prove that that was agreed as a group of fishermen from a specific fish landing site, then incorporate them with the gear exchange project. And how that works, because we've had some of the authorities, special fisheries, they've made, let's say, a mistake, but then was the top-down approach regarding the issue of fishing gears. We suggested that the fishermen would just document exactly what they need regarding mesh size, ply, and everything. They were the same people we sent to the shops. They bought the gears for themselves. We only paid from the office after communicating with the shop owners that all gears have been collected, sorted to make sure that they're the right gears. And then from there, together with the authorities, we distributed them out. So we were sure that they were getting the right gears that they will put into good use, agreeing with them with the sustainability of the project. And that way, we've seen the project working. And that's where we started seeing the number of turtle bycatch dropping.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you very much for your answers and all your insight, Kahindi. That was quite informative. And now we have a couple of questions for Kartik as well. So the first one I have is in regards to your talk as well. So the question is, so what can folks in the global north do to help in this shift in conservation, in your idea?
That's I think at this point in history, one is not trying to create further strife. I think that many conservationists and biologists in the global north who really want to contribute to conservation as a whole. I think the first is, I would say, to be able to recognize alternate views, alternate cultures, and listen to the people that one is working with. And I actually want to extend this beyond it's being about the global north, as I think Murali explicitly pointed out. Those of us who are elite and privileged and educated and economically well off in the global south, we're the white people of the south, and the effect that our relationships with local communities in a way mirror or are analogous to sort of the relationships between the global north and the south. So I think the onus is in a sense on all of us to be able to listen to the people we're working with and provide the kind of support that they need at a particular point in time, rather than impose our ideas and our projects and our values and our money on those on the people we're working with, regardless of whether it's north, south, east, west, urban, rural, rich, poor. I think it's a universal onus that we have to learn to listen and acknowledge and build a consensus together.
Fair. I'm pretty sure that's a pretty complicated conversation that can go on for a fair bit as well. So I'll quickly move on to the second question. Now, how would we understand population numbers and conservation threats if, for example, we were to do away with the IUCN categorization?
So there's that's another conversation that can go on for a while. So the thing is that the IUCN the categorization actually conflates three very different things. There are three axes, and of course there are five criteria, blah, blah, they've used in sort of various combinations, all of that. But the three biological things that they measure, one is the absolute abundance of an animal, the range size of an animal, and the depletion over time, the reduction in abundance of an animal or plant. And because the IUCN Red List conflates these three axes, it's not always very clear if something that falls into a category because it meets a certain criterion, whether that means that there's actually a threat to it or not, or what the nature of that threat is. And this is something that I've been, this is another soapbox that I've been on for a while. The outcome of having a simplistic and gameable system, and I say gameable because pretty much every person that has a favorite species can find a way, can find a criterion along which they can get it to occupy a slightly higher threat category than it actually should. And I'm not saying that something that is really common can be classified as critically endangered, but you can always make a case for something that's endangered to be critically endangered, vulnerable to be endangered, and so on. And at the end of the day, when somebody tells me that something is endangered or critically endangered, it doesn't tell me anything about what I should be doing about its conservation, right? And so the government responses and even conservation responses are always sort of one size fits all. Oh, it's endangered, I should do this. But something that has a narrow range, or something that's been depleted because of use, or something that's rare in abundance, they all actually require different approaches, and some of them actually might require incentivization through use. And so my objection really is that there's this category and there's this black box, and it appears that when something is put into a category, then there's this one set of standard actions that you have to follow to conserve it, and that kind of defeats the purpose of a conservation prioritization exercise.
Fair. Thank you very much for your insight. And do have one last question as well. Now, just kind of in terms with the last one there. So main question was, how would communities, for example, start rallying for consumptive use of sea turtles and whatnot when the IUCN status is so clear on the data, and the world kind of revolves around big data? So how would organizations go about it?
Actually, it's simpler than you would think now. The Marine Turtle Specialist Group has been pushing for regional assessments, and I think regional assessments need to be, actually need to be based on contemporary data, and there could be many regional populations that are actually stable or increasing, and then would not those populations would not then have the larger global status of that species, and local decisions could be made on the basis of those data. So I don't see it happening because there's also sort of like global, there are larger global campaigns against use. But if we actually wanted to implement it within the current frameworks of assessment, I actually think it would be possible. At least based on my conversations with with some other turtle biologists, I think at least some of us believe that it's not neither as provocative nor as difficult as some people would make it out to be.
Yeah. All right, I think Murali had his hand up, so we'll let you have.
No, I'd just like to add to this, and like I've been working with Kartik long enough, and there are a bunch of us who also think, like, for example, if we take one of the sea turtle species out of the red list, I consider that as a win for conservation, not, that it's a loss that it's been. I would say that it's no longer endangered. That is a win for conservation, and that is something that we've been trying to try to see like where we could work, like across a broader group as well.
All right. Thank you very much. And we have time for just one last question, and we'll ask this of Dr. AA. So the question is, are decolonizing efforts in Philippines difficult?
I would say yes. Because as an NGO, for example, I rely very much to have any project on funding that's available. And usually this wouldn't come from our local government, because we're not a very rich country. So most of the funding that I would end up getting would be from abroad. And that somehow influences our targets and the outcomes of what we want to do. But I think it's in the end, you can benefit from that if we're clear on what we want as a nation, and with talking to communities and involving stakeholders. The Philippines is big on community consultations on anything. So I think that balances everything out. You just need to be careful, I would say.
Fair. It is a difficult, bit complicated sometimes as well. But yes, so I think that is all the time we have for questions for today's webinar. I'd like to once again thank all of our speakers on the panel for coming by, giving us their insight, their overviews into the work as well. It's been quite interesting, very heartwarming to hear about all the work and data everyone's been collecting and all the achievements as well. So with that being said, I think we're slowly going to wrap up. Thank you once again to the audience and everyone who came by. I hope this was a very informative session for you all as well. I'm sure I learned a lot, and hopefully we'll see each other around. It's a small world, especially when we're working in this field. So if you do have any questions or anything, please do send them our way. Either email it to us at ORP or just contact us through Facebook, Instagram, or any of the other social media outlets as well. All right. Anyone have any last words?
Is it all right if I can ask the speakers to stay behind so that we can get a screenshot, maybe with you, Dan, as well, if that's okay?
No worries. Okay, so I guess that's about it.
Okay. Thank you very much, attendees.
Thank you very much, everyone.
All right, I'm going to give you guys to the count of 3, and then we can take our screenshot. Okay, everyone smile. 1, 2, 3. I screwed up. I'm sorry. Give me one more. I'm sorry. I'm supposed to be the tech guy. Okay, one more time. I'm sorry. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thank you all.
All right.
Thank you, guys.
Pleasure meeting all
Okay.
of you. I hope you all have a great day. See you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you.
Very good.
Oh, all right.
We still have people in the attendee section. Prashant?
Yeah, 1 second, please. Oh my gosh. Okay, I think it's all right, folks. We can try and debrief at another time. I think it's okay.
Oh, fair enough.
Okay. All right, thank you guys.
No worries. Thanks for everything, guys. It was
No
great.
worries. Great job. Okay, talk soon.
Bye.
Bye.